Hello and welcome to our daily sketching routine. It is Saturday, June 14th, 2025, and today's topic is going to be about fine details. Before we begin, welcome back if you're returning and welcome if you're new to the channel. I sketch and post every day and I use timers to stay focused and to build a habit. This is a continuation. It'll probably be the last video of this particular series, and I'll post links to the other two videos. It's basically turning into a drawing, like a detailed drawing. And today I'll work on like the fine details, but we'll get into all of that. This is just to kind of show you where I'm at. It took me about an hour. What I'll do is I'll post the first video. I'll post like where I ended up in that video, and then I'll post or put up here on the screen here, like from yesterday's video, just so you can kind of see the progression. And it was an actual progression, although, for example, I spent an hour on this. And then in yesterday's video, like between the two previous ones, that was like 30 minutes. And it's not done. It may take a few more hours, probably, which I'm obviously not going to do like right now. But I wanted to go over like the process and also like the thought process. So with that said, let's just go over like the tools. Again, there's more details in the other two videos, and yeah, like this will probably be the last of this, and then I'll just kind of like work on it. So this is on a sheet of Bristol paper, which is really nice, and it looks like more finished and you can remove it and stuff. So I'm wanting to do sort of more finished illustrations and stuff in the other two videos, and then predominantly also in this, I just use a Papermate like medium point, like felt tip on this Bristol vellum paper. I also started going in with like a fine point. This is what I have right now, and I have some other sort of like finer point. So this is like the medium. This is mostly like detail, so I have different stages. I have like the sketch stage, and that's kind of what the videos are. So you have the initial sort of sketching, and then next you kind of have like the light and dark, where you really start to like define sort of the actual shapes with kind of the lighting situation, or like the pattern. And it doesn't have to be like cross-hatched. It could be whatever, but like it's like dark and light pattern, or it could also be outlined. But even if you outline it, the outline is like the light and dark. So it's really about like the shapes, in other words. That's kind of the second part. At any of these stages, the reason I have them is because, for example, in the first sort of sketching stage, I did it loose enough, and you can also use a pencil. I like to use a pen because it makes me more like kind of deliberate about stuff. But in the sketch stage is where you can adjust things if necessary, or if it just doesn't work, then yeah, if you use a pencil, you can erase it. Or if you're using like a pen, sometimes you just have to scrap it and like draw something else or whatever. It's loose and like quick enough. You can plan it out more. You can do like thumbnails and stuff. So I talked about that before. In the second stage, where you're figuring out like the light and dark pattern, which is also like the line work part of it, you're defining like the shapes. So the sketch either worked or it didn't work. And so now you're kind of figuring out the shape. And then in the detail stage, the shapes and everything, like the composition and like the drawing, in other words, that's what the shape is. Like it's the shapes is the drawing. It either worked or it didn't work. And so when you go into the detail stage, it's not going to save it. Like it's only going to enhance it. So my analogy is if you're like baking a cake or whatever, like there's no amount of icing, which is like the detail, because that's what people are seeing. You're putting like the last sort of layer, like the detail. It's not going to save the cake. It was either the ingredients either worked or it was baked correctly or not. But like the worst thing is to try to have the detail like save it, because it's not gonna be good. So that's basically where I'm at. I'm at like the detail stage, where I'm not redrawing anything. All I'm doing is, and I'll kind of talk about, I have several videos talking about like detail stage, and so I'll kind of repeat some of that because most of it is detail. I'm going to call this fine detail because I don't know that I have a video where I talk about like the fine detail. These stages, they're not really meant to be necessarily like distinct. They kind of go together, but like it's good to sort of build them up at the same time, in other words. So it's kind of like, let's say we are baking a cake. I mean, you can mix the ingredients and put it in the oven and then work on like the icing, like prepare the icing. So with all of that said, let me kind of zoom in here. So one thing is, this is pen and ink. So I have this sheet of paper to not smear, because it will smear from your hand and stuff. And so like this area, for example, I'm literally using like a fine point or like a fine liner, and hence the term like fine detail. And I didn't necessarily have to use this. I could have just stuck with this, which may be simpler, but it's going to have more of a like bold look like this, because this is like medium, but you can see sort of the difference. And so you can introduce a more like fine detail look to it. So I'll just kind of look at some areas. So for example, kind of like this. So all of the stuff that I was demonstrating in the sketch stage, it's still here. But notice like the shapes are smaller because the pen stroke is like a shape. So for example, right here. So this is a cross-hatching technique. So that's like fine detail. It's literally like the finest line. It's the smallest. But then you can also have, this is like the medium point right here. So the other thing is also, once you get this far, like you can look up reference. I mean, you could have looked up reference at any time. Like originally this started off by just looking at like a picture. That's kind of a different topic as far as the methodology. So I'm sort of showing the methodology of how to draw stuff from imagination, but then use reference to kind of enhance it, basically. So yeah, like I have a picture of like some mountains. It doesn't look like this since I doodled this, so it doesn't, but it kind of has like that look. So it's up to you, like how realistic, in other words. So by doing this, for example, so notice that this is with the medium. To keep things simple, you might just want to use like one pen, just to kind of understand. For example, like this, nothing says that that should look like that. This can balance this out, and then can balance this out. It's basically just shapes is what it is. And the smaller shapes you have, the more detailed something looks. There's like a hierarchy of things. So this picture is sort of surrealistic, meaning there's this giant sword and there's these other swords that sort of, it's like a collage or something. But it works. It works partly because of the fact that I used the same pen. I used kind of like the same technique and everything. It was just like random stuff, but it kind of works just because of like the way that I did it, which is what the other videos kind of showed. But then there's like the design elements, like, or the artistic elements. Like what makes something artistic isn't that you copied like exactly like a photograph or like nature. What makes it artistic is the fact that nothing says that that should look like that. So why does that look like the mountain? And why does that look like a sword? And why does this look like a person that's standing like in a landscape? It's something to ask yourself. Some of these things are kind of subconscious. Like you just kind of, like if you can see things, you sort of know. So that's what I mean by like the hierarchy of like different shapes and stuff like that, and values. I mean, I'll do my best to kind of explain, and obviously I'll do more videos. The other thing is, and I've talked about this in other videos about detailing, is don't rush. That's why I'm not just going in and like just detailing stuff. There's not the time to rush. I mean, I would say maybe don't rush any of it, but like that's why sketching is fun, because that's where you can kind of doodle stuff and not worry about it. It's kind of like, again, the cake analogy, where once you get to the icing, so you know that the cake was baked well and that it's good. However, most people are going to be looking at the icing, and the icing is like the first thing that you taste. And so it is important, like there is a purpose behind it. And it is like the style of it and stuff like that, like the style of like the cake, if you will. So this is like the style of the illustration. So part of the style is the tools that you use. Part of it is the topic, like the genre. Yeah, like part of it is like the technique, like the pen and ink with cross-hatching and stuff like that. the idea of like doing things in stages is to figure stuff out, like if something is working or not. So like, for example, the whole time I was kind of looking at like, is this figure going to work? And if it was or not, like I kept thinking about it as I was working on it. I kept thinking, because the thing is, like when you look at like reference, so for example, there's no reference for this. I could have looked up reference and just drawn something from reference, which is fine. I tend to use those for studies. I just sketch them like in my sketchbook for fun or whatever and to like learn. But what's fun for me, so that's like something to do if you're learning how to draw the figure. But like once you do that enough, the fun part is kind of coming up with spontaneous kind of things. So that's what I was going for, was something kind of spontaneous. But at any point, and that's kind of true with the rest of it also, it's like at any point I'm also kind of thinking, does it work as like a picture, like something interesting to look at? There's always, you're sort of thinking ahead like all the time. In the initial sketch, like how off was it? And then the next thing would be, once the light and dark started to like be established, like how off was that? Like how much of that can I actually fix? Like with that said, I will kind of come in here and talk about like the fine detail. Now that I introduced two different like tips, like line width, so that's like the medium one. The idea isn't to go in with this and like try to like fix the outline, because that, you don't really need to do that. So one thing is, there's actually like another layer if you want, which is to introduce like, let's say you could use like a marker or like a brush or whatever to really put in like another layer of ink. So an example of that is kind of like this, and just fill that in. You could have drawn it in a way that had that in mind, like that was going to be like, that's a look, is my point. Just like this, if all I used was this, that would be like a look, and I wouldn't need necessarily to add this one. When you add this, like the fine point, it does take longer, but that's okay. That's just part of like the look of it. When you're in the details, so this I would consider this like detailing. So when you're detailing something, one, give yourself some time. I like to, when I'm at the detail stage, a lot of times I have to count, I count up when I use a timer, because I actually want to work on it, because I can see like what I would work on it. But I find it useful to have a timer because you can overwork it. That's the thing. And then you end up creating like more work for yourself than you need to. So notice like at the detail stage, these are your final shapes. So if we're going to use the cake analogy, it's like the actual like swirls and like leaves or whatever on like cake design. So same with this. Like, go ahead and outline it. So what I'm doing is I'm just reinforcing the shapes that were built up. Like underneath it is the actual like baking of the cake, and this is just the icing. Yeah, and part of that is the outline. Like, does it read correctly? And I wouldn't just go in and outline stuff or detail stuff like willy-nilly. I would really think about it and take your time, and yeah, like put on some music and use this thing to like not smear it. I mean, this is the detail stage, so this is where it's like all the hard work was to get you to this point where you take your time, because this is really what people are actually going to see, and this is actually what the picture actually is going to look like. Now, you could have stopped at any point. You could have kept it as a sketch. So by the time I'm doing this, it's moving from a sketch to an actual drawing with like a sketchy look to it. But if I don't take it to this part where it's detailed, then it's just like a sketch, and you can just leave it at that. However, there is a purpose to why you're doing those steps as the artist. Like, you're the one who, it's kind of like, again, we're going with the cake analogy the whole time this time. today. But yeah, you can bake a cake and keep it simple. Like, it's still good. Like, you don't have to put like the fancy icing on it. So yeah, use something so you don't smear it. Like, I saw that, like, here. Like, you can decide, for example, like, to leave that. You can ask yourself, do I want to leave that? That's why you build everything up, like, at the same time. Because the picture is going to tell you. There's not, like, a rule that says, now you must go in and, like, do this to all of it. Like, it's not like that. At least in my opinion. And plus, I think that looks boring. It looks kind of mechanical. If the idea is, okay, now I got to go in with like this pen and then just fill, like, it doesn't really work like that. Basically, like with the cross hatching, you're saying like these are edges. So just an example is I could decide, like, I might decide just to do this for like the contrast of the subject matter. So I'm just going to do this. So that was like with a medium point, and now I'm going in with like a fine point. And basically laying down tone. And this is a cross-hatching technique, so you just kind of practice with cross-hatching. Just draw like random things like in your sketchbook. But the idea behind this is to give it sort of a background, like blend it in like with the background. And it's like a certain kind of tone. And that was like the main idea behind that. But because I introduced like a fine point, like here, this is like the medium point. Like, you could just do that for the whole thing, just for simplicity's sake, like while you're still kind of learning about cross-hatching, for example. So notice like the look of it, it looks different. However, if I go over it again, it'll look kind of like this. And that has more to do with the eye flow, because there's nothing that says that that has to look like that. Hopefully that makes sense. And then the other thing is, let's say I have like an area like this. If I go in with a thinner line and go like this, like, it has a different tone, or it has like a different look to it. And you just kind of file that away. You can kind of see it like in the picture. Like, what effect does that have? What kind of eye flow does that give you? Because that look right there is kind of what I did like with the face. So the face is going to look more interesting to a person, like looking at this drawing. The character is going to look more interesting just by the fact that it's a person, or like, yeah, like a character, like there's a face right there. So your eyes are going to be drawn there anyway. But I basically used that technique that I used here. So that's like a technique, but I use the technique like on the face because this is going to look interesting anyway. And then on top of that, you're using multiple sort of techniques like line work on it. My thought process is always to take time and build things up gradually and let the picture start to like tell you like what it's wanting based upon like things like eye flow. So this is still part of detailing. And do this. So this is what details are. And I mean, it takes practice. I'm just kind of explaining stuff. A lot of this stuff is just sort of intuitive. But let me know if you have any questions. There's more to be said, and I like to talk about these things as I'm working on an actual drawing or painting. But yeah, that'll be it for today's video. I want to thank you for joining me for our daily sketching routine. And if you enjoy these videos, please support the channel. I appreciate it. And until next time, keep on sketching.